So today I'm going to talk about how I managed to buy a detached home, a single family home before the age of 30. I live in Abbotsford, BC. It's about an hour outside of Vancouver. Vancouver's one of the most expensive markets in the world. I think the list just came out for this year and it was like number 4 or something like that. But it's been as high as, I think it was even number 1 at one point. But Abbotsford is probably like, 50% cheaper. But the detached home that I bought was still 1.1 million bucks at the time. Right now it's probably gone down a little bit, but I think, and the purpose of this video is that a lot of people my age, and especially the younger generation, think that essentially what I did was impossible. So I just want to explain my story, exactly what happened, and my frame of thinking as I was trying to achieve that goal, just to maybe help somebody, right? Because there's going to be 2 people that watch this video. There's going to be the first group that's like, you're a trust fund baby, your parents gave you everything, you got lucky, blah, 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 blah. And you're going to go bankrupt and lose that detached home when the market crashes, which maybe so, but at the same time, I'm not going to sit in my parents' basement and worry about what might happen every single day of my life. If something bad like that were to happen, I'll deal with it at that time. But, I could leave my house and drive to a show and get in a car accident on the way there and die, right? So there's always going to be something to worry about. There's a second group of people that are actually going to take inspiration from this, right? So when I first started, on the journey of wealth building, there really wasn't anybody to take counsel from, right? Like YouTube was still pretty new. Like finance YouTube was just kind of becoming a thing in like 2016, 2017, but everybody was in the US, right? There was nobody that had a similar upbringing and similar story to me creating content here in Vancouver or basically anywhere in Canada about, saving up for your first home and building wealth and all these things. So hopefully I can kind of be that example to somebody watching this video and maybe take some things that I say in this video and apply it to your life. I always had the goal of buying a single family home, even as early as like 18 or 19 years old. I always knew that's what I wanted to do, right? And when it finally happened, because I had been working on this for almost probably like a decade, right? By the time it happened and I achieved that goal, the goalpost already moved, right? So I don't even see this as a big accomplishment anymore. And I remember even when we bought the home, my girlfriend being like, why aren't you happier? And it's because the goalpost had already moved, right? Like what I had wanted to accomplish in my life had already moved past the detached home by the time I finally got it, that it didn't really seem like a big shiny object anymore, right? So I'm not making this video to brag or anything like that, right? Because from my frame of my point of view, I don't see it as this amazing thing anymore, right? And I'm really just doing it to try to help the next generation type of thing, because you see all the rhetoric today is that, it's impossible. I'm screwed forever. So why even try? So basically what I did, right? I was a plumber. I started out as a plumber. Actually, I started out as I used to like clean the shop for 𝐕𝐈𝐃𝐄𝐒 Construction. You've probably seen them around town. And I would like sweep their shop, and I did that for 6 months. They didn't want to give me a raise, so I bounced. And then I was a bricklayer for 6 months with my older brother who still does bricklaying. And I hated that, dude. I was eating like 5,000 calories a day just to maintain the amount of calories I was burning doing that job, and you're out in the pissing rain all day. So I got sick of that and I went into plumbing. Now I had gone to school for plumbing for like, right after high school. I did like the 6-month program to get the certification, but then I kind of hated it when I was in school. So I decided to not do that. And I came back to it like a year or a year and a half later, right? So like I was 18 when I got into plumbing, and I started at a company that would pay you on commission. So I took a couple sales courses. I got trained a little bit. I understood enough about plumbing that I could be on, by myself. And I learned how to sell plumbing. And from that point forward, I was always like one of the top 2 plumbers of the week for commission sales. And I was like 19 at this time, right? And then I kind of started doing some side work too, right? So I was making like 50 grand as like technically a second-year apprentice on commission, which was a lot of money because they're paying second-year apprentices like 16 to 18 bucks an hour at the time, right? So I was making 50 grand doing that. And then I was doing a lot of side work on the weekends and after work. And all of that I would just use to, I bought my truck with it, or I would just keep it in the bank and just save money, right? So by the time I was 22, I had saved up about 60 some odd $1,000 because I lived at home with my parents until I was 21, which is a luxury. I know some people have to move out when they're like 18 or 19. And then I actually moved in with my girlfriend and her dad, and we would rent a room in his house for $600 a month, right? Which was a really good deal. Kind of sucked pretty much just living in a room, but it was, it really helped me save money. I'm super thankful that we had the opportunity to do that, right? So by the time I was 22, I had saved up like $60,000. And not everybody's going to be in the same position that I was in, right? I know it's harder to save money now. The costs are higher, rent is higher, but I think if you sacrifice and you like lower your standard of living for a time, like if you can rent a one bed for $1,400 or $1,500, maybe split it with a roommate, so you're only paying $1,750 or $750, right? So I saved up about $60,000 and I lived in Surrey. And then what I did was I wanted to buy a 2-bedroom, and I think I was approved at like $450 at the time. But I didn't want to spend the top of my budget because I wanted money. I still want to be able to save and invest, right? So I actually moved from Surrey to Abbotsford, and I bought the cheapest 2-bedroom condo on the market. Thing was a piece of shit. It had no in-suite laundry. It was in a bad area. Somebody actually, like the week I moved in, somebody got killed in like the building across the street. Not that I'm laughing at somebody got killed, but just, that's how bad of an area it was. And then somebody later on got jumped against my front door in the building, and I had to like clean blood off the door and off the walls around my unit. Just to give you an idea of the area that I moved into, right? Like the product that I bought, because I didn't know any better. I was just focused on the expenses. If I were to do it today, I would not buy that condo knowing what I know today. But at the time, it made sense because I was a service plumber and they gave me a work vehicle. So I didn't have to pay for the gas. So I knew I could move a little bit further away and not have to worry about transportation costs, but I'd have to exchange more of my time to travel. So I moved to Abbotsford, which sucked because it was like 40 minutes away from all my friends, 45 minutes away. And, in my early 20s, when you're still like hanging out with your friends every weekend and drinking, partying, going camping and all these things. So it sucked being that far away from my friends, but I wanted to sacrifice. And I moved in there, and then my mortgage at the time was only $1,000 a month. Now, keep in mind, people are like, wow, it's way harder today. That would never happen today. That same condo right now, you can probably get for $340,000. I bought it for $275,000, right? So the pricing, when you look at like older condos in the Valley, really haven't moved that much in the last 8 years, right? Your mortgage payment might be $200 more expensive than, what I was paying 7 or 8 years ago, right? So maybe 3, I don't know. So anyways, in that first year, I saved up like $12,000 or something like that. And then it was like a year and a half or 2 years later, I had enough for a down payment on a property in Windsor, Ontario. And the reason why I knew I was looking into Windsor as I was listening to all these podcasts that would talk about real estate investing, but they were all about the US, right? And they're like, oh yeah, just buy a $50,000 duplex and it'll cash flow $900 a month and you only need a 3% down payment. And then I looked here and I'm like, well, that's not possible. That's not at all possible. You can't do that anywhere, right? So I started doing some research and I went on biggerpockets.com, which is basically like the Facebook of real estate investors. And I found at that time, this is like 2019 now, that all these investors were looking at Windsor, Ontario as like the next place. So I looked into it and I ran the rental numbers and blah, 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 blah. And I found that they were building a bridge from Windsor to Detroit that would employ a bunch of people. They were doing massive renovations on the university. And they had a whole bunch of stuff going on that were going to bring some jobs into the city and make it not so dependent on the auto sector. And it made sense. I was like, well, I found a house for $150,000 in the east side of Windsor. And it rented at the time for $1,200 or $1,400. I can't remember. But it was cash flow positive day of closing. I made like $400 a month positive cash flow, even with a property manager involved. And then I ended up upping the rent the next year to like $1,600 or something like that. I had like a new tenant in there. So I was making it ended up being like $700 a month I was making for like the last 3.5 years I owned that property, right? And when I went to sell that thing, like a couple years later, it was worth, I sold it for $300,000. So I basically doubled my money on it, right? But before all that, what I was doing in my 20s to be able to save this money, because that's the question, right? How do you save money? It doesn't make sense how people save money. Well, this is the way I looked at things, okay? So I did go and party and I did do stuff, but I didn't spend money on clothes or accessories. All my buddies at that time were buying like fuel tires with rims for their trucks and sound systems, and they were leasing brand new trucks or financing brand new vehicles. And I just had the same truck that I bought for 10 grand for like 8 years. And I bought that on a credit card where you don't have to pay interest for the first 6 months. And what I did is I just did a bunch of side work and I was literally able to pay it off in the 6 months that I owned it. So I never paid any interest. So they were doing all that stuff. And then people were going on like 6-month backpacking trips to Europe and Asia. And the way that I looked at it was like this. I was like, hey, if I really work my ass off over the next month, right? And I pay all my living expenses, I might save $1,500 or $1,000 a month, right? If I like work my ass off, work all the overtime, which I worked a ton of overtime, and I do the night shifts, which I did a ton of night shifts, and I do the on-call shifts, which I'd literally pick up other people's on-call shifts. Like I'd be like, hey bro, do you want me to take your on-call shift? And pretty much everybody said yes, because nobody ever wanted to do the on-call. So there were times where I was on call like 3 weeks in a row. Like I just did as much as I could to make as much money as possible, right? And the way that I looked at it was like, hey, if I save $1,500 this month, right? And I go on a vacation for a month. Let's say that vacation cost me, for ease of numbers, $10,000, okay? And I'm also not working for that whole month, okay? So, my bills are there, which were like $3,800 a month. And then I have to pay $10,000 to go on vacation, right? It's $13,800. I'm not making any money during that month, and I have to pay my living expenses, and I got to pay the cost of travel. So $13,800. Well, if I work my ass off every single month and I only save $1,500, I just gave away 9 months of progression, 9 months of my life to go on that vacation for 1 month. I'm like, that's a really shitty trade. That's a bad trade to make. That's the way I looked at it, right? And I know a lot of people are like, oh yeah, you got to travel in your 20s while you're young and you got to do this. And like, I agree, but Alex Hormozi raised a really good point. I heard him say this. He's like, you can either be an overworked and underlived 30-year-old, or you can be an overlived and underworked 30-year-old. And my choice was to be an overworked and underlived 30-year-old. That's the choice that I made. And I'm very happy with my choice now, right? There's a lot of things that I didn't do that pretty much all my friends were doing. So I could do this later. So I could live a better life later, right? And again, it's not to brag, right? I'm really hoping that this does help somebody. But like now, if I hear my friends and stuff complaining about like the price of going out to lunch. So they will, make their lunch at home and stuff like that. Or, they'll complain about the grocery bill being $100 instead of 70. And like all these expenses are very unconsequential to me at this point because I sacrificed earlier, right? Like those types of expenses don't really bother me anymore. Whether the bills are 10 grand or 12 grand, it doesn't make a big difference to me in my life at this point, right? And again, I'm not saying this to brag or anything like that, but the reason why that is because I sacrificed for those 10 years, not going on the vacations, not buying the sound systems and lifting my truck, or buying a brand new truck and financing the truck for 5 to 7 years, or doing any of these things that pretty much everybody does in their early 20s. I didn't do any of it. Yeah, I went out to eat and I drank and I did a lot of the stuff that 20-year-olds still do, but any of those bigger expenses that, in my opinion, really set you back, I didn't do any of that. So again, the way I looked at things is anytime that I would spend money on something like that, I would look at how much money do I save after working my ass off the whole month. And if it's $1,000 and going out and buying a watch costs $2,000, it costs me 2 whole months of my life to get back to where I was before I bought that watch, right? So I'm trading basically, a lot of people look at it in dollars, right? They'll be like, if you make $50 an hour, then after tax, you make $35 an hour and you buy something that's $70, that's 2 hours of your life. I didn't look at it like that. I looked at it like, what's the amount of money I have after all of the expenses that I paid? And how long does it take me to make, to save that much money? And if I go and buy something, then I have to give back that much time of my life that it took me to save that money. So that's the way that I looked at it. And I worked as much as I could in my early 20s because there's 2 ways you can look at it. You can be like, hey, you're supposed to go on vacation, do all these things when you're young, but you can also look at it like this. You should work as much as you can while you're young, because when you're older, you might have kids and other responsibilities and all these things that don't allow you to work that much. So your prime working years would actually be in your 20s. not necessarily your prime vacationing years, right? Like now that I'm in my 30s, now I want to go on those vacations, right? But now I can do it without feeling guilty, right? Because I don't tie the amount of money that I spend to the amount of time in my life it takes me to actually save that money, because the way I make my income now is a lot differently because I own a business. The way I make my income is tied to performance, not the amount of time it takes me to make that income. So I just don't feel as guilty now if I go on vacation or I do anything. I still haven't, right? I think I took one day off in like May of 2024, 1 or 2 days off, and that's about it, right? But I will take time off eventually. But it's not easy. It's freaking hard, man. You know, after I bought that first property, I sold that. I bought the first property, then I bought the investment property, and I actually bought 2 other properties, but I didn't make any money on them. I made like $8,000 or something like that, right? And then in 2023, when this house came up, again, you know, real estate sales were really slow. I wasn't making any money, and interest rates were all-time highs. Like that's when fixed rates were 6.5% when I bought this house. But when it came up, I wasn't really overly concerned about the price and what might happen with the market and all these things because I wanted this house, right? And if I'm going to live here for 10 years, whether I pay, you know, 1.1 or 100 grand or 900 grand, like I probably wouldn't care 10 years from now is the way I looked at it. But we wanted this house. So even though it was extremely scary for me at the time to make the jump and buy the home, I just did it anyways, because even to this day, I haven't found a single house that we like as much as this one come on the market. And it's been, you know, almost 2 years now. So when we found this house, I bought it and I structured the financing in a way that I could hold the condo and the house at the same time. And then after we moved into the house, that's when I sold the condo vacant. And I only made $90,000 on that condo after holding it for 6.5 years, but I made 150 grand on the investment home, right? So those two together were basically the down payment for this house. So to make a long story short, that's the way, you know, if you really want to make this happen for yourself and you don't see it as being impossible, because I don't think it's impossible at all. I think a lot of people could make it happen if they really put their mind to it. And especially if you're young and in your early 20s, you have so much time to do this. If you look at it in the sense of like, you know, if I go on that vacation, then it takes me 2 months or 3 months to save that money to do that. Well, now when I come back from that vacation, I got to work 3 months to get back to where I was before. And if you work as much as you can while you're young and you work the overtime, you do the cash jobs, you have a side hustle, and you just don't make those big discretionary expenses like a new car or like mods for your car or big vacations or anything like that, or Rolexes and all this kind of stuff, I still think it's very, very possible. I think you could not easily, it'll be tough, but I think you can get into your first condo, start saving up money, start investing, and then eventually you'll have some equity. You can sell that and you can move up the property ladder. And if you enjoyed this video, please do let me know, like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to chat with me about buying or selling in the Fraser Valley, there's a link down in the description. Otherwise, I'm that Agent Kelly. I'm making moves to move you. Peace.